Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever been with someone who seemed to care about you, but at the same time treated you like your love was optional? Like you were always the one proving yourself, explaining yourself, and trying to show that you're serious? Sit with me for a second and really think about that. You call. They take hours to respond. You try to get closer. They suddenly pull away. You show love. They act colder. And the confusing part is this: the more patient and understanding you become, the more distant they sometimes appear. Most men think this means they're doing something wrong. But what if the truth is actually the opposite? What if the problem isn't that you care too little, but that your love is being tested in ways you don't even realize? Today we're talking about something most people are afraid to say out loud: the shocking truth behind why avoidant personalities sometimes appear to disrespect the very people who love them the most. Now, before we go further, let's be clear about something. Not every person who pulls away is a bad person, and not every relationship dynamic is toxic. But there is a pattern that many men experience when dealing with avoidant partners. And that pattern often leaves men confused, exhausted, and questioning their own worth. Avoidant people often value independence and emotional distance. When someone gets too close, their instinct is to create space. Sometimes that space comes out as cold behavior, mixed signals, or emotional testing. And if you don't understand what's happening, you might respond in ways that make the situation worse. You might chase harder. You might try to prove your loyalty. You might tolerate things you normally wouldn't. And without realizing it, that can slowly change the power dynamic of the relationship. In this video, we're going to break down the uncomfortable truths many men eventually discover the hard way. Not to attack anyone, but to help you understand what's really happening so you can protect your dignity, keep your emotional balance, and stop confusing love with constant approval seeking. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is understand the game before he decides whether he even wants to play. Let me say something that might surprise you. Not everyone feels safe when someone loves them deeply. In fact, for some people, the moment love becomes real, they start feeling uncomfortable. Now, if you're a man who values loyalty, commitment, and consistency, this can be extremely confusing. Because in your mind, love should make things easier. It should bring people closer. It should make both people feel secure. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness can trigger the opposite reaction. And this is where the testing begins. You see, avoidant personalities often grow up learning to rely heavily on themselves. Independence becomes their comfort zone. Emotional distance becomes their form of protection. So when someone starts getting too close, emotionally, mentally, or even romantically, their instinct is to create space. Not always because they dislike you, but because closeness starts to feel overwhelming. Now here's where things get tricky. Instead of clearly saying, "I need space," avoidant individuals often express the discomfort through subtle behaviors that look like disrespect or indifference. They might suddenly become colder after moments of intimacy. They might take longer to respond to messages. They might seem interested one day and distant the next. To you, it feels like mixed signals. To them, it's a way of regulating emotional pressure. And sometimes, without realizing it, they begin testing the relationship. These tests can appear in small ways. Maybe they pull away after things were going well just to see how you react. Maybe they cancel plans or act slightly detached to observe whether you'll become anxious or frustrated. What they are subconsciously checking is this: how much emotional control do I still have in this situation? And here's where many men accidentally walk into the trap. Instead of staying calm and grounded, they start chasing reassurance. They send more messages. They try harder to prove their loyalty. They become more available, more accommodating, and more eager to please. Now understand this carefully. Wanting to show love is not a weakness. But when love turns into constant proving, the balance of the relationship starts to shift. The avoidant partner begins to feel like they hold the emotional power, while the man begins working harder and harder just to keep the connection stable. And ironically, that can make the avoidant person feel even more pressure, which pushes them to create even more distance. So the cycle continues. The man chases. The avoidant pulls back. The man tries harder. The avoidant tests again. And before long, the relationship feels like an emotional puzzle that never fully makes sense. The controversial truth many men eventually realize is this: Sometimes the strongest response to emotional testing isn't chasing harder. It's staying calm, maintaining your self-respect, and refusing to turn love into a performance. Because real connection doesn't grow from constant testing. It grows when two people feel safe enough to stop testing each other entirely. Let me start this section with a question that might feel a little uncomfortable. Have you ever tried to love someone so well that they would never want to leave you? Many men fall into this mindset without even realizing it. They think, if I'm patient enough, if I'm understanding enough, if I give enough, eventually she'll see how much I care. And on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. Loyalty and generosity are strong qualities in a man. But here's the difficult truth most men don't hear early enough. When love turns into constant overgiving, it can slowly change how the other person values that love. And this is especially true when you're dealing with someone who already struggles with emotional closeness. Let's break this down in a simple way. Healthy relationships have a natural balance. Both people invest effort, time, attention, and emotional energy. No one feels like they are constantly trying to prove their worth. But when a man begins giving far more than he receives, something subtle starts to happen. The relationship becomes predictable in the wrong way. The avoidant partner begins to feel that no matter how distant they become, the man will still be there trying to fix everything. He'll still call. He'll still apologize. He'll still adjust himself just to keep the peace. And once that pattern becomes clear, respect can quietly start to fade. Not necessarily because the avoidant person is cruel or intentionally disrespectful, but because human psychology often values what feels mutual, not what feels automatic. When someone feels they never have to earn your attention or effort, they may start taking it for granted. Now here's where things get even more complicated. Many men believe that if they just give even more, the relationship will stabilize. So they try harder. They become more available. They overlook behaviors that previously would have bothered them. They stop speaking up about their needs because they don't want to create conflict. But instead of strengthening the relationship, this can slowly weaken their position in it. Because love without boundaries doesn't feel strong. It feels negotiable. And avoidant personalities, who are already sensitive to emotional pressure, may begin to respond by pulling even further away. Not necessarily because they dislike the man, but because the dynamic now feels unbalanced. Here's the controversial part many people don't talk about. Sometimes what looks like being a good man in a relationship is actually fear of losing the person. So the man gives more, tolerates more, accepts more, all while quietly hoping the effort will be rewarded. But healthy love doesn't require someone to constantly prove their value. It requires mutual respect and consistent investment from both sides. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It simply means remembering that love should not come at the cost of your self-respect. A man who values himself doesn't stop caring for someone, but he also doesn't turn himself into a constant source of reassurance just to keep someone emotionally present. Because the truth is simple. When love becomes something you are always trying to earn, it stops feeling like a relationship and starts feeling like an emotional negotiation. And strong men eventually learn that the healthiest relationships are the ones where love flows in both directions, not just from one side trying to hold everything together. Let's talk about something very real but very uncomfortable. Chasing someone emotionally usually doesn't create attraction. It creates pressure. And pressure changes how people behave in relationships. Imagine this simple idea. At the beginning of a relationship, things usually feel balanced. Both people are curious about each other. Both people put in effort. Both people want to impress each other. But when one person starts chasing too hard, the relationship slowly stops feeling equal. Now listen carefully, because this is where many men relate deeply. When a man feels emotional anxiety about losing someone, he may start increasing his effort to feel secure. More calls, more messages, more apologies, more flexibility with boundaries. At first, this might feel like dedication. But over time, it can create a silent power shift. The avoidant partner begins to feel that they don't need to invest as much emotional energy because the man is already doing most of the work. It's not always intentional manipulation. Sometimes it is just psychology at work. People naturally move toward situations where they feel comfortable and in control. If one person is constantly chasing emotional validation, the other person may start feeling less pressure to change their behavior. And here's the relatable part. Many men chase because they believe consistency will prove their loyalty. They think, if I stay patient enough, she will realize I am safe. But emotional attraction is not always built on availability alone. It is also built on emotional confidence, stability, and self-respect. When chasing becomes excessive, it can unintentionally send a message that your attention is guaranteed regardless of how you are treated. And this is where respect dynamics start changing quietly. You might notice small signs. Response times getting longer. Less effort in conversations. Plans becoming more one-sided. Not because the person hates you, but because they feel emotionally safe without needing to invest more. Now here is something very honest. Chasing does not make you weak as a man. But losing yourself in the chase can slowly make you feel frustrated, anxious, and emotionally drained. Strong emotional presence is different from emotional pursuit. Presence means you care, you communicate, and you show consistency. Pursuit means you start adjusting yourself constantly just to keep someone emotionally close. And that's where many men start feeling the emotional weight of the relationship without realizing how it happened. The most powerful mindset shift here is understanding this. You don't have to fight for emotional attention. You can simply stay emotionally grounded and let the relationship grow naturally. Because real attraction usually grows in spaces where both people feel free, not pressured. The controversial truth? Sometimes the person who chases the least controls the emotional pace of the relationship. Not through manipulation, but through calm confidence and emotional stability. And that is something many men only learn after they have already exhausted themselves emotionally. Let's be very real here. Most men don't ignore red flags because they are blind. They ignore red flags because they are hoping the behavior will change. And hope can be a very powerful emotion in relationships. You might notice something is off early. Maybe communication is inconsistent. Maybe emotional effort feels one-sided. Maybe you feel like you are always trying to fix misunderstandings. But instead of walking away, many men stay. Why? Because they start negotiating with reality. They tell themselves things like, maybe she's just busy. Maybe I just need to be more understanding. Maybe if I stay patient, things will improve. And sometimes patience is a good thing. But patience should never replace self-awareness. Here is a controversial truth that many men need to hear calmly, not harshly. Love should not feel like constant emotional confusion. If you are always wondering where you stand, you are not in emotional stability. You are in emotional uncertainty. Now let's talk about something men sometimes do without realizing it. Some men tolerate behavior they would normally never accept because they are afraid of starting over. They fear loneliness more than emotional imbalance. So they begin accepting small disrespectful behaviors. Not huge dramatic problems, but small things. Late responses without explanation. Emotional coldness after intimacy. One-sided effort in communication. At first, these seem minor. But over time, small things become patterns. And patterns are what define relationships. Here's the part where I give you a little tough but calm advice. A man who wants respect must also show that he expects respect. Not aggressively. Not emotionally violently. Just calmly and consistently. Speak up when something bothers you. Observe how your concerns are received. Do they listen? Do they try to understand? Or do they make you feel like you are the problem for expressing needs? The goal is not to win arguments. The goal is to see if the relationship is emotionally safe for both people. Because emotional safety is what keeps relationships healthy long-term. Now I want to speak directly to men watching this. Sometimes you are not losing a relationship because you did something wrong. Sometimes you are losing emotional peace because you stayed too long hoping someone would become who you needed them to be. And people don't usually change just because we want them to. They change when they want to. So instead of trying to fix people, focus on observing behavior patterns. Actions will always speak louder than words. If love is real, it will feel consistent, not confusing. And if you constantly feel like you are walking on emotional eggshells, that is information you should not ignore. Because self-respect is not about leaving every relationship at the first sign of trouble. It is about knowing when effort is turning into emotional exhaustion. Let's finish this with something powerful and very honest. There is a moment in many relationships where the emotional game suddenly changes. Not because the other person changed, but because the man changed how he responds. This usually happens when a man stops performing emotional labor just to keep someone comfortable. You see, in many avoidant dynamics, the relationship can slowly turn into a kind of emotional performance. One person is constantly reassuring. One person is constantly pulling back. One person is constantly trying to close the emotional gap. But when a man stops chasing emotional validation and simply stays calm, something interesting often happens. The avoidant partner may suddenly become more curious, more communicative, or more emotionally present. Not because he is playing games, but because he stopped creating pressure. This doesn't mean becoming cold or emotionally unavailable. It means becoming emotionally stable and predictable in a healthy way. He still communicates. He still shows care. But he doesn't panic when things feel distant for a moment. He doesn't over-explain himself. He doesn't chase reassurance constantly. He doesn't sacrifice his boundaries just to maintain emotional comfort. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, because it breaks the old pattern. And sometimes, when patterns break, the other person either adapts, or the relationship naturally reveals whether it was healthy to begin with. Now here's something very important and slightly controversial. Real attraction is not built on emotional pressure. It is built on emotional safety, confidence, and mutual effort. When a man stops performing for love and starts standing in his own emotional strength, he changes how he is perceived. He is no longer someone who is trying to earn love. He becomes someone who is choosing to share his time and energy. And that difference is powerful. But this is not about playing psychological games. It is about self-respect. Healthy relationships should feel like teamwork, not emotional survival battles. If both people want the relationship to work, effort should flow naturally from both sides. If only one person is constantly holding everything together, the relationship becomes emotionally heavy. The strongest mindset for men is this: you can care deeply about someone without losing yourself in the process. You can be loving without being desperate. You can be patient without becoming emotionally invisible. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to win someone's love. The goal is to find relationships where love is given freely, not fought for constantly. And that is where emotional peace usually begins. Here is one final controversial thought to leave you with. Sometimes the biggest mistake men make is believing that love should always feel like effort, sacrifice, and emotional fighting. But real love is not supposed to feel like you are constantly trying to convince someone to stay. The truth is, emotional maturity in relationships is not about who cares more. It is about who can stay calm, consistent, and self-respecting even when emotions are strong. If you are constantly chasing, over-explaining, or trying to fix emotional distance by working harder, pause and ask yourself a hard question. Is this relationship growing naturally, or am I carrying it alone? Strong men don't chase love by losing themselves. They attract healthier relationships by staying emotionally grounded, respectful, and patient without becoming desperate for validation. Remember this: wanting love is not weakness. But needing to perform for love can slowly drain your confidence and peace of mind. Healthy relationships should feel like two people choosing each other, not one person trying to earn approval. If this topic resonated with you, share your experiences in the comments. I genuinely want to hear how you've experienced these dynamics, and I'll be connected with you through those conversations.